Blessings, everyone, and thank you for joining me. Today is another podcast that's a little different because I don't have a guest. Um, I did a previous podcast on my response to sort of some Twitter interactions I had with Jonathan Pageau, and this is sort of a second part because that sort of got me thinking about. A certain response to homosexuality that I saw connecting Bishop Robert Barron, Jordan Peterson, and Jonathan Pageau. And I found their responses very similar. And I wanted to kind of explore that. And I wanted to explore that a bit. Now, my background is in history, so I always like to try to frame everything within a historical context. So let's start there. And I'm going to share my screen. Okay, what is this? I've written about this particular Romanesque sculpture several times. It's kind of strange because I first became aware of it when I was a student at UC Berkeley. So, gosh, I feel old. Was it over 30 years ago? Yeah. Yeah, around 30 years ago. So, well, yeah, I graduated in 94. So, yeah, 30 years ago. Um, I always found this image incredibly perplexing. It depicts the rape of Ganymede. If you're not familiar with Ganymede, Ganymede was uh, a character in Greek mythology, a young boy who is captured by Zeus in the form of this eagle, and he's raped by Zeus. And I remember when the professor, when we were studying the Romanesque Basilica of Vézelay, St. Mary Magdalene in Vézelay, that this particular sculpture appeared in the church. And I was like, what the, why is it there? So this always sort of fascinated me, not only as a pre-sex abuse survivor, but just as an art historian. Um, so I just finished actually this book, which is really good. It's called The Corrupter of Boys, Sodomy Scandal and the Medieval Clergy by Diane Elliott. I hope I pronounced her um, first name correctly. She is a professor in the humanities and history at Northwestern University. So, sure, I think much of what I long suspected was proven in this meticulously documented and researched book. I mean, the footnotes alone are impressive. And I encourage people to read it. I think it's out of print though, but double check. I think the case that she makes in that book is that homosexuality, as practiced by the clergy, in particular pedophilia or the grooming of abuse of boys and adolescents, has a very long history in Roman Catholicism in the West. I don't want to mischaracterize her theory, but this is the way I interpreted it. Is that it oftentimes is related to the in the West you had the requirement of clergy celibacy, and that oftentimes this facilitated I don't know how to say this. It facilitated an atmosphere of homoeroticism and homosexuality within not only monastic communities but within the clergy in general, and that the Catholic Church felt that that scandals involving the clergy and women was actually much more harmful than sexual relations between the clergy and men and boys, because the opposite sex relationships um, involving priests actually hit towards their theology of mandatory celibacy. So it's complicated, but I think it's interesting because I think it's definitely trickled down in the Catholic Church, and I think that that has sort of informed their the way that they have dealt with or not dealt with or covered up child abuse in the Catholic Church, which often involves homosexuality because 80% of the victims were and are male. So I think that has also informed their approach to homosexuality. This is from, I could never get an exact date on this. It's from the early 1980s, as far as I know. There's four Catholic priests here. I can't recall their names. I did, if you look at my blog, I did a sort of a breakdown history of this photograph and of the gay rights movement in the United States and the involvement of Catholic priests in that. This person right here, this is John J. McNeil. He was a very famous Jesuit priest in the 1970s and 80s, primarily. He appeared on the Donahue Show, which was a famous daytime talk show back in the 70s and 80s. And he was a very important early pro gay advocate in the Catholic Church. Later, came out as gay himself, but he wrote a famous book. Gosh, what was the date? I'm going to guess 1976. It was called "The Church and the Homosexual," and it. This is going to be important later in this conversation, but he laid out some certain theories that have persisted. Let's just I'm just going to mention the three often repeated. The sin of sodomy was not, or excuse me, the sin of Sodom and Gomorrah was not that of sodomy, but it was of inhospitality and relating to their lack of uh, hosp hospitality towards the angels, I guess. I don't, it's very bizarre. Leviticus is locked. The Levitical prohibitions against homosexuality is locked within a historical context, within sort of, Judaism at that time, and it's not really applicable to modern times. And Paul's admonitions against homosexuality are also rooted in that, but he was really talking about sort of abuse within homosexual relationships having to do with master-slave dynamics. And again, that has nothing to do with the modern conception of homosexuality. So that's where he was coming from, John J. McNeil. And those arguments you will hear over and over again, and I'm gonna get to that later. Whoops. So this is now I want to talk about Bishop Barron, this man in the middle right here, Robert Barron. He was the auxiliary archbishop in the Archdiocese of Los Angeles, and that's when I primarily got to be familiar with him and his work. I'm not sure where he is. I forget. He's been moved. Of course, Jordan Peterson and Father Mike Schmidt, another Catholic priest. Jordan Peterson. This was well, at the time he had 4.25 million subscribers. This was a podcast he did. I can't recall this man's name. Oh, there it is. John. I won't even try to pronounce his last name. So we have Bishop Robert Barron, Jordan Peterson, and Jonathan Pageau. A podcast. And here is this is where I'm going to start. Here is the infamous or famous conversation that Robert Barron had with podcaster Dave Rubin. Dave Rubin is an openly homosexual man, sort of a, I don't know what you call him, neocon conservative, sort of a log cabin Republican, maybe. I mean, he has a lot of fiscal conservatism, but of course he's, I guess, socially liberal. You know, he's married to another guy. So I want to look at a section of a part of that interview that has to do with homosexuality. Okay, here is this section of the interview that I'm interested in. And I have to applaud Dave Rubin here because he asks him the question about homosexuality, uh, the church's teachings on it, and about it, and Bishop Barron's personal beliefs. He wants to know. He specifically asks him uh, to share that with him, and this is what Barron does.
Okay, so now let's move to the other two examples that you mentioned. So gay marriage.
Yeah.
So I don't know how much Googling you did on me before you got here, but I am gay married. You are
Yeah.
in my house right now. I've thoroughly enjoyed talking to you this
Yeah.
entire time. Actually, when I was doing research on you, I got to the gay marriage portion. I stopped reading because I don't know your full opinion, and I did not want to know before we sat down. So now I welcome you to
Yeah.
tell me that, and whatever you say, I will continue this conversation
Yeah,
in
no.
the spirit which I've done it so far.
Right, and I'd say several things. I said this one time, I was in New York with Cardinal Dolan, actually, and we were talking to reporters, and I said,
Brother.
if the only thing a gay person hears from the Catholic Church is, you're intrinsically disordered, we got a very serious problem on our hands.
No gay person has ever heard that from the Catholic Church. This is a ridiculous straw man argument. Bishop Barron is a moron, and he's talking about Cardinal Dolan. Cardinal Dolan has permitted the most militant LGBT activists in the Catholic Church access to churches and parishes, and out at St. Paul is one that I've talked frequently about. James Martin is headquartered in New York City. There's a gay priest in New York who has said that gay men are more receptive to the teachings of Christianity because sexually they're receptive. It's ridiculous. And recently, Cardinal Dolan allowed the funeral of a transgender activist to take place at St. Patrick's Cathedral, the mother church of the archdiocese, and he played stupid and tried to walk it back when he got bad publicity. It's ridiculous.
If that's what the message has become, the message of the Church to a gay person should be, you are a beloved child of God who's been embraced by the mercy of Jesus Christ and invited to a full share in the divine life. You're a son of God, called to eternal life. There's message one. Now, within that, are there further specifications to be
Message one is what's message two?
made about anyone's moral life? I mean, my moral life needs a lot of work, trust me, And I need to hear a lot of challenge from the church. But
we'll do confession at the
yeah,
end. I'll shut the
afterwards,
cameras. Yeah,
afterwards we'll have a good conversation about that.
Yeah.
No, but the first thing that a gay person, like any person, should hear is you're a beloved child of God. And so I agree with those.
In the Catholic Church, that's all they hear. That's it.
And Pope Francis has been good on this, that have said if that's the way our message was coming out, we were disordered. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. We had a problem there in the way that message was being conveyed. What's the Church's take? That sexuality has a structure and intelligibility that's built into it, if you will, by God and is discernible within our physical, psychological, and spiritual makeup. It's got a proper end and purpose. The church would say it's for intimacy and for procreation. Therefore, that's the fully integrated, properly expressed form of sexuality. When we fall short of that, I say we on purpose. I mean, we all in different ways, I think, fall short of that ideal, including married people. The church says no to that.
This is a false analogy, what he's doing here. He is saying that sodomy, let's say between two men, is the same sort of problem that, let's say, infidelity between a married opposite sex couple, or if they're into some sort of weird kink or something, it's the same thing. This is ridiculous because the sexual relationship between two men is a dead end. The sexual relationship, even though if it becomes disordered, let's use his term, in an opposite sex couple, is ultimately still redeemable. They can fix that. This over here is not fixable.
In a certain way, I don't
Wait,
want
wait,
to
I'm sorry.
press it.
The church says no to what?
Says no to whatever that imperfection
I don't want to.
is, whatever that
I don't want to press it. That's the Catholic Church's stance on this issue.
failure fully to integrate
okay.
the meaning of sexuality. And see, in a certain way, I wouldn't want to press it further than that. That's the church's job, is to say no to what it perceives to be an inadequate, incomplete integration of the sexual.
Inadequate. Sodomy is inadequate.
Act. So not just gay marriage, but now go across the board. Anything that falls short of that ideal, the church would say no to. Why? Because it's down on people, it's puritanical, it hates sex. No, it's keeping its bar high and calling people always to that bar. As we all fall short of it, the church offers at its best the lavish mercy of God. I mean, that's sort of the context I try to set for that conversation.
Right. So I understand the church is.
So homosexuality, two men practicing anal sex is not the ideal. That's essentially what he's saying.
Bar on this.
Yeah.
That's fine. I'm not part of the church. It's fine for the church to have that bar. I have no problem with that. So your personal feelings on this matter. So gay marriage was passed, what is it, a year and a half ago or so?
Yeah.
Almost 2 years now. I assume you felt it was the wrong decision by the court.
This is where I got into trouble with Bishop Barron and his minions, because here he essentially says that he would not overturn Obergefell. That's what he says. They can spin it, and they did spin it any way they want. He says he would not do it. And I assume he would overturn Roe v. Wade, which was, but Obergefell he would not.
Is that fair to say? I don't want to put words in your mouth.
Yeah, no, I do, but I don't think I would want to press it much further. I think where we are right now in the States, I'll apply the Aquinas principle. I think it would probably cause much more problem and dissension and difficulty if we kept
That's it. He said it right there.
pressing it.
So then do you not see gay marriage as one of the ones that you said was so pressing earlier when you said that abortion would be one that is so pressing?
Yeah.
That it could shift, it could alter the course of a country or something. Do you not see gay marriage at that level of severity?
No, I do think it does have a negative
No.
impact on the wider society.
He said no.
I do think it is in a certain way, a compromising or undermining of an institution that's key to the health of a society.
Can you explain that a little further? Like, how so?
Just as the dignity of the individual is fundamental morally, so I think marriage, we've classically seen as the great building block of the wider society. So all the different forms of social life are grounded finally in that fundamental form of social life. So marriage open to children is that form. And society, I think, takes that as one of its foundational elements. So I do think there's a compromising if we if we forget the integrity of that foundation.
Yeah. Is this one of the things where I sense that your heart and uh, your spiritual self maybe aren't quite matched up? Because I don't sense judgment from you sitting
Yeah,
here. I really don't.
yeah.
And I don't sense that you would try to legislate to reverse the decision. But I also sense that you can't fully say to me, well, it's okay.
Yeah, no, and that's probably right. The way you just put it there is probably right. I wouldn't want
So he wouldn't want to legislate. He wouldn't want to overturn. Problematic for him.
to fully just say, that's great, off you go.
Yeah.
At the same time, I wouldn't want to get onto a Crusaders tank and try to, reverse that. And I certainly don't want gay people to have the impression that the church is, in some kind of special warfare against them.
Insane. Insane. So he wouldn't get on a Crusader tank to overturn Obergefell.
The church is
I can't listen anymore to him. He's a disaster. So, number one, he had a really incredible opportunity here to talk with Dave Rubin because right in the beginning, Dave was saying, no matter what you say, this conversation will continue. He had a great opportunity here and he blew it. Okay, now why did um Bishop Barron answer and react the way he did? This is from his a book from 2017. This is also the year that I can't recall the name of this book, some pretentious title, Set Fire to the World or something like that. But it was from that same year as the um the Dave Rubin interview. And here's a quote, as I read Francis, it's a Gallipoli kind of moment. Yes, we could keep pouring all of our energy into the sexual issues, but let's change it to environment. Let's change it to the poor, to immigration, to other parts of our church. That has had a very liberating effect. And I don't mean that for a minute cynically. I don't think he's a bit soft on abortion, for instance. He's said very strong things about it. He's not soft on transgenderism or same sex marriage, but he's changed the subject. It's Gallipoli, like we're getting mowed down over here. We're not making any progress. So maybe let's bring some men and material elsewhere to this grand struggle. That's what I see him doing. And it strikes me as just the right move. So what Barron is saying there is that the cult, the culture and society has sort of moved on from these, what he says, sexual issues, which includes same-sex marriage. So let's emphasize these other, um, social justice issues like the environment, the poor, immigration. They've certainly um, taken a strong stand on immigration. The Catholic Church is funding and facilitating the crisis currently at the southern border, um, mainly due to the pre-sex abuse scandal. They've lost much of the native-born Catholic population, so they're importing um, bodies to fill the pews in their empty churches, and they're looking for children to human traffic and to abuse. And the Catholic Church is pretty open about this. This was a conference in 2018 that coincided with the meeting of families that the Catholic Church puts on every year. It was on the LGBTQ issue, and here you have the famous pro-gay Jesuit James Martin, another well-known pro-gay Catholic priest, James Allison, um, the Bishop of Northampton. This took place in somewhere in the UK, I can't recall. And then you have this very creepy graphic here at the top of a child's hand, accompanied by the um, pride flag, and then this adult male hand with the Vatican flag. Quite bizarre. I want to talk a little bit about this interview before I move on. I'm sorry I've got notes here on paper. And then I also have I'm also juggling. This is a difficult podcast for me because I'm juggling audio, I'm juggling video, still images, and I have a lot of notes here. Let's see. So part and parcel of Barron's take on homosexuality is that of accompaniment. The Catholic view of accompaniment. This term, accompaniment, in the Catholic Church is most closely associated with the papacy of Pope Francis. I was trying to look for a definition of it. I found a couple of definitions. I wanted from Catholic sources. This is from the Archdiocese of Seattle, Washington. Accompaniment is how we spiritually support others, especially those who are struggling. It requires that we are genuinely present with them, listening to them, and supporting them, with the goal of helping them hear God's call for them. We are like a bridge of support connecting others to Jesus Christ. This is from the Diocese of Crookston, which I'd never heard of, in the United States. Pope Francis says at the center of being a missionary disciple is being engaged in accompaniment. This leads to the next question. What is accompaniment? It means we get involved in a relationship with someone so that we form a connection with them, which allows us to reflect the love of Jesus for them. Whatever that means. That's just total nonsense. This is interesting because in one of the several conversations that Jordan Peterson had with Bishop Barron, Barron said this about accompaniment. You're going to accompany this person all the way down. Here's like Pope Francis is really good because accompany met and the accompaniment and the church is a field hospital, he says, for people deeply wounded. That's really right. And we got to accompany people all the way down. That's a bit scary to me. That does not sound like accompaniment. That sounds like enabling. We have to let me look at that quote again. We have to accompany people all the way down. That's not accompaniment. That is enabling. Let me think of three examples because I was a hardcore sinner in my life. Homosexuality, porn, occult, prostitution, drugs. You name it. I was there for all of it. There's three examples that I've always looked at in the Bible that deal specifically with sinners. You've got um, Christ. Well, people that promote or um, are advocates for this accompaniment theory will always say, "Well, Jesus sat with sinners. Jesus broke bread with sinners." Yeah. So if you look at that one example in the primary example, I guess, in Scripture is Jesus sat with these people that were in a sinful life, but what did he do? He told them the parable of the prodigal son, which is essentially, in my mind, one of the themes of that. It's a rich parable. One of the themes of that parable is the decision by the father of the prodigal son not to enable him because in my head the prodigal son was already an issue before he left. I don't think he was like the other son, um, dutiful. And then one day he just woke up and said, "I'm going to be a bastard," because he was pressing his father for his inheritance. And so there were already issues there. And the father's like, "Here." take it, go. Door's always open. Because it's interesting because in the parable, it mentions that the father saw his son approaching, so he was watching. So this is a story against enabling because the father allows the boy to leave, and then the young man gets into all sorts of issues in this faraway country, and he ends up um, with the pigs, which I can relate to figuratively and literally. Um, and then he comes home. He's contrite and humble at that point. Uh, and the enabling is over. There's no enabling. It's done. The other example that I remember specifically is of course, well, I've always believed that the public sinner is Saint Mary Magdalene. People can argue about that, but he says, he forgives the woman, go and sin no more. Okay, it's over. And then also the Samaritan woman at the well, and I'm simplifying it, but it's sort of like at the end of that, he tells the woman, go home and clean up your life, clean it up. So that is not accompaniment. Christ was not accompanying these people. And I think the modern Catholic sense of the word, he was compassionate, but he was also truthful to them. And I think that's what's the fundamental problem with the approach of Barron and some of these other people, where in their sort of sense of accompaniment, they have the compassion part down. They don't get to the truth part. And I think because I think part of this theology of accompaniment is that maintaining the relationship with the person, let's say the sinner, is more important than telling them the truth, because telling them the truth would jeopardize the continuation of the relationship. And the relationship is the all important thing because they believe that through the relationship, a conversion is made possible. And that's a really simplistic, stupid way to think of people who are involved in self-destructive or addictive lifestyles, because it's just not gonna happen. I just say it never will. But usually what takes place in those relationships is the person who's trying to accompany the sinner ends up changing their views, or toning them down or dumbing them down. And I think you see the conversation with between Barron and Dave Rubin is a perfect example, because Barron is deliberately ratcheting everything down in order to maintain, and he has maintained that relationship with Dave Rubin because they also collaborated in other things later. And but at the end of this podcast, I'm going to show, well, what fruits have that accompaniment bore, and they're not good. Okay, this is from a 2022 interview with Dave Rubin and Jordan Peterson. Now, things had changed in David Rubin's life from 2017 to 2022. Dave Rubin was married in 2017 when he spoke with Bishop Barron. Now he's having children. So how's accompaniment going? This conversation is, I wrote some notes down, is a master class in equivocation. Um, Peterson had, I'm not an expert on his his online content or his podcast. I have to say that I was in the beginning, I was a fan of his. I liked his paternal personality and his sort of attempt to father these sort of wayward young men in the world through his online presence. I really liked that. I thought it was cool. I thought he was filling a need. I think what happens, and I thought he was good at that, um, when, especially with I love Dostoevsky, and Peterson is also, I would say, a fan of Dostoevsky, and I think he looked. One of the things I like about Dostoevsky is, I mean, I love the Brothers Karamazov, is sort of trauma and neglect and abuse in a family environment and how that affects specifically men. I think that's a major thing in the Brothers Karamazov. And I think um, Peterson was really picking up on that because I think young men in society were sort of, I don't want to say neglected, but I think the problems that that group were having. I mean, if you just see in terms of college attendance, it's dropped. University attendance, is that I think those issues in that particular part of the population were being um, not looked at. And I think Peterson was drawing a light on that. I thought that was very good. But I think a problem a lot of times with people who become online celebrities or social media celebrities is that they feel required to comment on everything. And I wish that Peterson had sort of stayed in his lane because I think he was very good at what he initially was doing with young men. But then, of course, he's commented on everything: transgenderism, homosexuality, foreign policy, Israel. Just it's too much, and I don't think that's his niche, and I don't think he's good at that. So here, he gets into this conversation about gay marriage, but I don't think, or same-sex parenting, which I don't think he explicitly had talked about before. Maybe he had, and he's just equivocates so much. He's like, "Well, gay marriage is an idea, but a same-sex couple raising a child isn't the idea, but a monogamous opposite-sex couple is better, but a child needs a feminine and masculine masculine role models." But it kept going on and on, and there was this part of this conversation where when they were talking about role model, feminine and masculine roles in a family and how that's important for children. And Dave Rubin is like, well, we've got female night nurses and we can afford this. And uh, uh, one part I found difficult to listen to is Dave Rubin as well, my partner has more nurturing um, aspects of his personality. And I see this gets to one of the problems with homosexuality is that it tends to become a caricature or a parody of heterosexual couples with, and you see this in lesbian couplings as well. I think it's more stark sometimes because I have been to, back in the day, I went to lesbian weddings, and what was kind of stark sometimes is you have the more feminine woman in that relationship wore a wedding dress, and then the one who isn't so feminine sometimes wore a suit or a tux or something. I thought that was always interesting. So they're taking on roles, heterocentric roles. And I think Dave Rubin is kind of describing that in this conversation too. Well, my partner is more nurturing. And oftentimes that sort of dichotomy reflects itself, especially in gay men and their in their sex roles. And I won't get into that anymore. But that's where Jordan Peterson is. And then another very bizarre part of the conversation was, well, it's very important. Studies have shown that children be breastfed. And then Dave Rubin is, well, we've got a freezer full of breast milk. And I was just like, you got to drop the truth on this guy. And he won't do it. And Bishop Barron won't do it either. So let's just listen to a little bit of this conversation here.
Children who are breastfed do better.
Yep.
I believe that 1 year of breastfeeding is equivalent to, I think breastfed kids have a 5-point IQ advantage, and 1 point IQ is worth 1 year of education.
I have
basically.
2 freezers in my garage, 2 industrial freezers full of breast milk.
Right,
That's
right.
What
So
David has done all the.
Gross. Peterson just needs to say, hey, a plastic nipple's not like a real one. It's just, he just needs to stop it, but he won't do it.
Research on this.
Right. So another complication, but okay. And we don't have data. We don't really have data on motherless children raised by fathers from infancy, right? Because it's pretty rare.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if there's a literature pertaining to that at all. We do have a literature on mother-headed families without fathers, and the data there are crystal clear. It's not good to be fatherless. Now, that doesn't mean that there aren't some women who are struggling mightily as single mothers who don't do an outstanding job. But what it absolutely and 100% means that on average, that's suboptimal and badly suboptimal. And so it seems to me that the minimal stable requirement for ensuring the psychological health and financial viability of a child is something like a nuclear family structure.
Yes.
Minimally, right? So you need a mother and a father, or at least you need 2 people, one who plays a maternal role and one who plays a paternal role, or that they split those.
Wow. Plays the maternal role.
2 seems to be better than 1. Now, how much of that's linked to sex, we also don't know. It seems that the feminine role is more accepting / nurturing. You see that with the proclivity of women to be more agreeable temperamentally. That kicks in at puberty. And so I think that you have to be accepting and nurturing, especially in your attitude towards infants before they're mobile. So say before 6 months, before 9 months, an infant does no wrong. It's 100% acceptance. The problem with that is that that's not true as the child develops, because it has to switch to more of an encouraging role. It's like out of your dependency into the world, and the paternal spirit encourages that development. Now, mothers can do that too, but roughly speaking, women tend to do the nurturing thing more and men do the encouraging thing more. So now the question is, how do you mediate? How do you manage to fulfill both those roles in the absence of a heterosexual arrangement?
Right. So now naturally we understand that there are men who are.
This is where Jordan Peterson tried to speak truth. And this is where Rubin rationalizes it. And this is where the accompaniment kicks in. And Peterson's like, oh, okay.
Who are more nurturing and women who aren't as nurturing and all of those things. Now, you know David pretty well, and we've been out to dinner with Tammy many times, and you know him. He is incredibly warm and nurturing and loving and deeply cares.
So this dude's like a woman.
About all of those things. And I'm telling you, he is reading about skin-to-skin contact every day and all of the breast milk stuff and everything. And I know he will have a huge percentage of the stuff that a mother would bring. But I also know it's not all of it.
Did you hear poor Peterson? Right. This is so sick.
Well,
and
also,
he knows it's
the
not
other
all
thing
of it.
too is that you guys have to do that consciously.
Yes.
Right. With with research in hand, and to
so a pseudo mother in the form of a male is okay. This goes back to the essential lie of homosexuality, that a man can use his anus as a vagina, and a man with certain feminine traits can raise a child like a woman could.
Build up that proclivity that would be there more automatically, arguably, with a mother, and all the psychological and hormonal transformations she undergoes, and that transition into breast milk production and all of that, which is a fundamental transformation in a woman's biology and her psyche. Now, you and David have ample resources at hand, financially and intellectually, that enable you to traverse this pathway.
So rich guys can buy babies, hire female, sort of like wet nurses. It's sick, but this is where this is the conversation. This is where it goes with Peterson. I'll just read what happened. I've had my moral qualms about the suitability of gay relationships and gay marriages, puzzling that out, knowing that especially on the side of male homosexuality, that as long as there's been recorded history, there's some percentage of 2 to 3% of males who have a strong homosexual proclivity. It's less clear on the female side. Okay, let me just address what he's saying here. So he's saying that throughout history, there's been 2 to 3% of men who are homosexual. Homosexuality is a modern conception. The activists will always point to Greece. It was predation upon adolescent boys. And these relationships were not exclusively homosexual. Usually the predator, or the older male that initiated these relationships, was in a same sex, was in an opposite sex relationship. And the young man who was abused in these relationships went on to have a opposite sex relationship in a family. They were not predominantly homosexual. So I don't think that's true. I think Peterson, to be more accurate, should have said that yes, homosexuality has persisted throughout history, but to say that there were men that were homosexual, I don't think it's true. So that's just a little nitpicking I have there. He continues, I would say, okay. And so there's no denying that as a reality, and then I really like you and admire you, and I certainly feel the same way about Douglas Murray. And so that's a case in point. But then I also found talking to you on the tour, and I thought, well, my personal sense was, well, if you want to have kids, that's a good thing. So Jordan Peterson goes from, I've had my moral qualms about the suitability of gay relationships and gay marriages, to I really like you and admire you. This is where the Catholic theology of accompaniment fails, because if you're not going to push up against somebody in their self-destructive lifestyle, and instead you decide to enable it, you change. When you dance with the devil, I think it's from the movie 30, what's that Nicolas Cage movie, 35 millimeter. When you dance with the devil, you don't change the devil changes you. So, and I've seen this 100 times. I've seen it with like trad Catholic families, or very devout Catholic families, and one of the kids comes out as gay, and the whole family goes from attending the traditional Latin Mass to marching in gay pride parades with P-flag. It's complex. It's more complex in families than in this situation, which is friends. In families, there's oftentimes this rush to, buy James Martin's books and, believe that my son or daughter was born gay or, or, was born in the wrong body or whatever, because a lot of times there's underlying um, problems of abuse in the family. So it's easier just to not address that. But I've seen it in friendships too, where people quickly change their fundamental views on a topic because of a friendship, and that's enabling. So let's finish the this quote from Jordan Peterson. And so I would be, well, let me backtrack. Okay. My personal sense was, well, if you want to have kids, that's a good thing. And so I would be fully supportive of that. And so congratulations, Dave. Yeah. And that's the same smile and consistent beauty that you have always shown to me and shown to everybody, to everyone that's walked into this thing. And well, I hope that it changes you even more for the better. That's very likely. I would say one of the things that's so remarkable about having children is if you're careful and you want it, you can have the best relationship that you've ever had in your life. It's right there. That's what the kid wants. You could have that and have it, man. Good talk, dear Dave. So it doesn't matter about all the facts that Jordan Peterson talked about in that conversation about the need for the balance and the harmony between male and female. It doesn't matter because I like you. This is essentially the opposite of what the the father of the prodigal son did. Um, if he, if the father of the prodigal son would have taken this same tract, he would have been, well, here's your inheritance. Do what you want. Stay home as long as you're happy. That's all that's important. Okay, let's move to the last example in my podcast. So we've talked about Bishop Barron, Jordan Peterson, and now Peterson's protege, Jonathan Pageau. Here's Jonathan with Ben Shapiro and Douglas Murray, who Jordan Peterson mentioned in that quotation that I read. I think it's important to look at sort of the social context that a lot of this discussion takes place on social media. There's a group called Gays Against Groomers, and they're sort of at the forefront of this LGB without the T movement. So it's sort of I don't know, it's sort of a log cabin Republican psyop that is rightly pointing out the absolute horrific experiments that are being done on children who are identifying as trans while normalizing homosexuality because I mean, when you look at some of the excesses in the trans community, sort of the Dave Rubin brand of homosexuality looks pretty normal, looks pretty Martha Stewart. So here they're pushing this, transsexual people or transgender people are actually gay. So this is the milieu that Peterson, Pageau, and Barron, are sort of circulating in. When, the reality is, far from the truth. This is when the reality is that grooming and predation are at the foundations of the gay rights movement. Here you see Harvey Milk. He had a penchant for underage boys. Here is Harry Hay. I think with Harvey Milk, he's one of those. Well, actually, he predates Harvey Milk. He's was one of the founding members of the Mattachine Society, which was the first gay rights group in the United States, and here he is marching for NAMBLA. Here is Allen Ginsberg, and also an early gay rights advocate. It's not inconsequential that James Martin is retweeting this article, this favorable article about Allen Ginsberg. Here's a quote from Allen Ginsberg. I'm a member of NAMBLA because I love boys too. Here is James Lindsay, who's in that same milieu, that with this meme about how the TQ is dragging down the LGB, really, very much infiltrated the Catholic Church, Catholic Charities East Bay. That's in Oakland, which is near me. Love is love for June, Pride Month. Although, I shouldn't say that it's infiltrated. Like I said at the very beginning of the podcast, it seems that this homosexual cult within the Catholic Church has pretty much been there since day one. More proof of that. Okay, so Jonathan Pageau interviewed Spencer Clavin, who is in the same podcasting sort of intellectual dark web. I guess that's a antiquated term now, but in that sort of same milieu. Spencer Clavin had wrote a book, How to Save the West. Spencer Clavin is also an out homosexual, gay man. He's partnered with, or he's married to someone from the Daily Wire, and Jonathan Pageau also works with the Daily Wire. I think I have. So Spencer Clavin is married to Joshua Herr, general counsel at Bent Key Ventures, which is the Daily Wire. And Jonathan Pageau has done a lot of work with the Daily Wire, as well as Bishop Robert Barron. I wonder if I have that picture here. Yes, there we go. So here is Jonathan Pageau. Here is Robert Barron, Jordan Peterson, Spencer Clavin, Ben Shapiro. So it's all in the family here. Michael Knowles, also from the Daily Wire, liked this picture from Worst Fest, apparently, I guess, in Texas. Spencer Clavin and his husband holding hands there in Lederhosen. And Jonathan Pageau wants to ask an open homosexual about how to save the West, which seems kind of bizarre because a cultural, I've said this before, a cultural obsession with homosexuality, it usually is a bad sign. You saw it we saw it in the Hellenistic period in Greece. You saw it in the fall of the good emperors, they called them, in the second century, with Commodus and then Elagabalus, and then you had the crisis of the third century in Rome. You saw it in Renaissance, specifically in Florence, but also in Rome, in this preoccupation with homosexuality in art. And then after that, you saw the Reformation, where half the church said, no thanks, we're done with the gay cult in the Catholic Church. And you saw it also with the fall of the British Empire in that period, with Oscar Wilde, and you're seeing it in the West right now. So it's sort of bizarre that Jonathan Pageau thinks that a gay man can save the West. Okay, so let's look at Spencer Clavin and what he is promoting about scripture and homosexuality. I think here it's important to go back to John J. McNeill. And because I think essentially the argument that Clavin has here in a discussion with his father, I think it's tied to the Catholic Church and sort of this or not queer theology, but sort of this a gay affirmative theology that you see in the Catholic Church.
What do you find? What do you find without interpreting it away, without trying to dodge the bullet? What do you find when you look at these passages?
Yeah, I mean, maybe it's best to start with Paul, actually, because a lot of people, are particularly worried about what Paul says. And it's 1 Corinthians 6, it's 1 Timothy 1, and Romans, the letter to the Romans, chapter 1. And, all of these vice lists, which you named, they come up in the context of Paul writing advice to the new fledgling Christian church. And what's interesting about these particular passages that have to do with same-sex attraction or same-sex sex is that they all have to do with how the church is supposed to resist the sins of the world, and especially the sins of the pagans, right? The sins of the Romans and the Greeks, because writing to Corinth and Rome, and in the context of those warnings, he says, look out at the world. Look at how terribly people go wrong, and obviously people go wrong when they deny God or they ignore God. So thieves, adulterers, liars, right? And in the context of this list, he uses these two words, the malakoi and the arsenikoitai. And this is literally the softies and the man-betters. So these are the words that everybody's fighting over, right? This is when many people think that when Paul says arsenikoitai, he's reaching back to that Leviticus text and saying, it's a combination of man and bed. So they think he's, reaching back to the Septuagint and the Levitical rules, thou shalt not lie with man as with woman. It is an abomination. And to me, and again, I say this in sincerity, but acknowledging that others may disagree, to me, that's not a persuasive argument, in part because Paul's whole project in all of these letters is to stress that Christians are no longer under the laws of the Old Testament. He says this in Galatians over and over again, right? You shouldn't get circumcised because circumcision puts you under the law, and that's what we're past. This has been fulfilled in Christ. And I don't think that at all that Paul wants to therefore just toss the Old Testament out the window. But I also think that one of the things he's saying is these laws in Leviticus are no longer a list of rules that we can just pick up one-to-one and drop into our lives as a list of things we have to do.
Oh my gosh, this guy is lying to people. He's sending people to hell. Christianity and homosexuality, it's hinged on just these particular two words in Paul. That's the argument he's saying. Otherwise it was just always permitted. It's just everything has to do with these two words. It's such a lie.
And so
let's just listen for 5 more seconds. I can't take much more.
That makes me wonder, so what is he talking about, right? What are the sins that he's identifying in the outside world? As Leviticus also was hedging off the Jews from their outside world. And, I think about my study of the ancient world and the classical world, and it's very clear to me that there would have been a lot of things that Paul was looking at, a lot of same-sex interactions that Paul was observing in, for example, the imperial court, in war. I mean, they would do terrible things in the ancient world. They would rape boys as an act of humiliation, pederasty, pedophilia. And actually, this is, Martin Luther, the great translator, the German translator of the Bible and originator of the Protestant Reformation, translates arsenikoitai that way. He translates it as pedophiles. And so for me, this is something that makes more sense and also sort of corresponds with my experience of the world. Augustine tells us match up the book of nature with the book of scripture and understand them in that light. And then the next thing that I then do is I say, well, a good thing to do is to take an unclear passage of scripture or a less clear passage of scripture and understand it
unclear to him
by a more clear passage of scripture. And Romans 1 is actually, I think, a more extensive description of what Paul is talking about. He goes on at some length there, and he says, these pagans, these Romans, and the temple of Isis, the court. I mean, I'm assuming now that this is what he's talking about. They abandoned God so much that they even gave up their nature. They resisted nature, and men abandoned natural relations with women, and turned even to relations with men. And that's an exact description of what I know happened in pagan societies. I mean, men who were otherwise perfectly happy in marriages would, rape slaves and do all sorts of things as a show of dominance or what have you. But it's actually not a description of what happened to me. And so this is where that experience
Right.
comes back, is like, I never gave up any natural intercourse with women. It was never natural to me to desire women in that way.
The argument that he's using here is that Paul is only teaching against heterosexual men who would partake in homosexual practices. For them, it's forbidden. But he's arguing that for someone like him, it is not. I can't go any longer with this because it really makes me angry. So this is, I'm battling trying to have sympathy for somebody like Spencer Klavan because I think he's essentially been duped and lied to, because this is old. This is old stuff. But I'm also that's also tied to the fact that if he was struggling with this stuff privately, I would have enormous amount of sympathy for him. But he is just disseminating these lies to other people, and that's where you get into a problem. So John J. McNeill wrote, "The Pauline epistles do not explicitly treat the problem of homosexual activity between persons who share the homosexual condition, and as such cannot be read as explicitly condemning such behavior. Nowhere in Scripture is there a clear condemnation of a loving sexual relationship between two gay persons." This is what Spencer Klavan's arguing. This is from John D. Whitney, S.J., pastor of St. Joseph Catholic Parish in Seattle, former provincial for the Society of Jesus in the Oregon province. St. Paul, a man of his times and circumstances, was clearly connecting the idolatry of the pagan world to the sexual behaviors that often accompanied it. Ritualized homosexuality and pederasty are significantly different from the loving and mutually chosen relationships of many committed gays and lesbians. But what we see today is something else, something not so easily answered by St. Paul's words or those of Leviticus. And here's James Martin. All these Bible passages that people throw at you, I think, really need to be understood in their historical context. I mean, Leviticus and Deuteronomy, and even the stuff from the New Testament where Paul talks about it once or twice, has to be understood in their historical context. Certainly, Old Testament times, they didn't understand the phenomena of homosexuality and bisexuality as we do today. And that's essentially what Klavan is talking about here, taking it to, a very personal level and saying that, well, that's not what I experienced. In their conversation, did Jonathan Pageau ever push up against the really erroneous claims that Spencer Klavan has made? No, he did not. The last video I want to show and the last one I want to talk about is this one between Jonathan Pageau and Stephen Woodford, who I was not familiar with. Yes, the Metaphorical Truth podcast, or if I'm wrong about any particulars there. This was from 2020. They talked about a variety of topics, most of it that wasn't interesting to me. I talked in my last podcast about, mainly about Jonathan and on our Twitter exchange. I have a bit of a problem with just his general project. Some of the things he's said, I find odd. I haven't listened, self-admittedly, I haven't listened to a lot of his work. I grew up in the 80s, and then I was in college in primarily the 90s, early 90s. I was at Berkeley, from 90 to 94. And I heard a lot of Joseph Campbell during that time. He was quite popular. And when I first heard Jonathan Pageau, Joseph Campbell was the first person to come to mind. I was like, this is very derivative, I thought. This is something that Pageau said, and I wrote it down. All things that have multiplicity are bound through something like a North Star in order for them to exist, even objects and things in the world. that scales up into us. And then we exist together as beings because we are made of a bunch of stuff, out of a bunch of multiplicities. But nonetheless, these multiplicities coalesce into one. My first thought was just this is new age bunk. It's Joseph Campbell, hard to, you know. Here's what I found this quote from Joseph Campbell. This that was similar. The good of life is to make your heartbeat match the beat of the universe, to match your nature with nature, Joseph Campbell. Also, it reminded me of something Carl Sagan said. Um, we are all made of star stuff. It's just very guru. I'm sorry, I'm not buying it. I think he appeals to younger people who didn't, I don't know, who didn't read Campbell. Um, you know, I don't want to sound self-righteous or pretentious, but I mean, I grew up in San Francisco in the 80s and I was at Berkeley in the 90s, so I kind of know this stuff. I mean, I heard Timothy Leary, you, and I was also familiar with people like Terence McKenna. So I just kind of feel like this stuff is um, a bit old. I wanted to show just a short clip from this video because it doesn't have to do with the topic of homosexuality. I just think it's interesting. This guy, Stephen Woodford, I think you need someone outside of the bubble sometimes to look inside and to make an astute judgment. Let's hear what he has to say.
From my understanding, you don't even believe that there is a conscious being called God out there.
Wait. I don't believe that God, it can be limited to being, but I
Is he-
believe that God, I believe that there is something above all categories, and that something is the source of everything, and that it's not a something. It's Saint Maximus describes God as being and non-being at the same time, and so there are different ways of describing this absolute. And consciousness is a good way to understand God. It's a good way to understand God because from heaven comes meaning and pattern, and so patterns come from above, and so our capacity to notice patterns and to engage patterns and to produce patterns is let's say culminates in the infinite and culminates into God.
You know how you have the New Age religions, which basically use this kind of form of Spinoza's God, where they just go, God is energy, man. And so you can't refute their positions. This is, of course, not what you're doing, but it is scarily close to it.
I think that was a very astute observation on Stephen Woodford's part, and I agree with him. Now back to the topic at hand. Here is a section of the interview where Stephen wants to talk about, I don't know if he specifically wants to talk about the topic of homosexuality, but he brings it up. And I think he does so earnestly. And I think this is an interesting counterbalance between the Barron conversation with Dave Rubin, because I think that I see Pageau being evasive here. And I think it's a missed opportunity, again, like Barron had with Rubin, to have an interesting conversation. And I think it doesn't happen.
So if I can really nail my point here, because this is one of the things that frustrates me the absolute most. And you'll be able to help me out here, right? You've talked about your experience and your being. And it's really good that you get to live your experience. And
Let me just interject. I don't understand Pageau's affectation sometimes, and far be it from me to critique someone's personal affectation, because I have issues with gay boys and stuff like that. But he has this attitude of like a California surfer dude, just the way he talks and I find it a bit off-putting. I think sometimes it's patronizing, but I'll just leave it there.
To live my experience. But what if your experience is that you're homosexual, right? Well, what if that's your experience and you live in an environment which, either because it's a feature or because it's a bug, It could be a bug or a feature that doesn't belong in this society. What if it is that you can't actually be yourself? You can't live your experienced existence, the way in which you've actually evolved to be. You know, homosexuality is found in all sorts of social species, and it's something that's absolutely natural. And yet we live in an environment where you're doing this, hey, let's like...
Well, I don't agree with that. It's not found in all sorts of species.
Take Christianity, be very careful not to remove this or to remove that. There's people that are being denied their experience, their way of life. And we have to find a way to be able to go, some of these ideas don't apply anymore. And this is something that frustrates me. Tell me one of the patterns of being in Christianity that is not applicable today. Is there any?
A pattern of being in Christianity itself. Like I said, I really struggle to, I do in fact struggle to, because the thing about a pattern is that it's a pattern. And so I think that the pattern that I described to you, which is just the basic pattern of the universe, and I would say that probably most religions agree on that. What Christianity offers is a particular, in that pattern, it offers a particular tweak on it. And I think it tries to offer a solution to some of the problems of the pattern. And the solution it offers is that there is an inevitability of hierarchy. These hierarchies are inevitable. You can't get rid of hierarchies. They're just hard-coded into how the world works. And so what then is the nature of this hierarchy? And the way the answer of Christianity is that it's love, is that which is above cares for that which is below, and that which is below submits to that which is above. So that's the particular thing that Christianity offers. And now then, in reality, it'll manifest itself in different ways. And so there'll be different applications. And so, for example, the prescription on homosexuality, I wouldn't say that that's a pattern. It's not a pattern. It's an application of a pattern of being, and it's a particular application of it. And so there are reasons why Christians believe that. And I mean, they're based on this pattern. We can go in. I don't know if we want to go into it now, because we've been talking for an hour. I don't know if you want to go into that right now.
Sure.
That's an evasive tactic there. I will admit it's easy for me to Monday morning quarterback and say, well, this is what Jonathan Pageau should have done. But I just don't think saying, well, we've been talking for an hour, is a good way to do it. I mean, I would have pushed up a little bit against his argument about, gay animals. Is it, I mean, animals eat their young and kill them. I mean, does that mean that humans should do it? Somebody whose work I've appreciated and whose honesty is Simon LeVay. He's a neuroscientist. I can't recall. I think I've quoted him so many times. I think out of Johns Hopkins. I mean, he's got every credential you can imagine. And, he's homosexual himself. And his project has been finding the gay gene, which he hasn't done. And he's been honest about the difficulties of that project. And he wrote, this is one of the things that he wrote, and this is from 96. Although homosexual behavior is very common in the animal world, it seems to be very uncommon that individual animals have a long-lasting predisposition to engage in such behavior, to the exclusion of heterosexual activities. Thus, a homosexual orientation, if one can speak of such a thing in animals, seems to be a rarity. So it seems to be more situational in the animal world. Okay, this is where Jonathan talks more about the topic.
Relatively flexible. As we said, we can have other conversations, but it feels like this would be a bad time to stop, because I feel like we're getting to the essence of things. So do your point, because
I don't think homosexuality is the essence of things, but that's okay. I don't mind talking about sexual taboos at all.
So this it's not the homosexuality. It's that people are denied to experience who they are. It's very...
Just real quick, why be flip with this guy? I don't think it's a good look.
So you think that homosexuality is who someone is?
It's integral to some individuals. Yeah, some individuals, say not for bi people.
So you think homosexuality is, let's say, it's an identity and it's not a behavior?
No, it's just as wired into them. It's certainly in many cases.
This is where Jonathan is trying to bifurcate. I see this a lot in Catholicism specifically. They're trying to bifurcate homosexual activity and the identity. And I think you can get into problems when you start doing that a lot.
Cases as it is that you're straight.
I don't think that it's a category either. Being straight is not a category. Heterosexuality is a modern. It's a category that pops up with homosexuality. It's not a category that you'll find in scripture, that you'll find in any religious system.
I agree with him there.
Heterosexuality is not a category.
Well, it is, and again, this is a language thing. It's the way in which you use this language. So you have like Leviticus, telling you what to do with homosexuals, which is,
Leviticus doesn't tell you what to do with homosexual. Leviticus tells you what to do with behavior.
It says stone them to death.
It says to stone men who are caught having sex with other men. By the way, in Leviticus, it doesn't say to stone women who are caught with other women.
Let me stop real quick because I think when you can get into problems with the Catholics do this a lot. They bifurcate homosexual activity and the identity. Let me just, this is something, and there's probably a lot of priests and clerics and theologians who would disagree with me here, but I'm just throw it out there. This is from Matthew. You have heard that it was said to those of old, you shall not commit adultery. But I say to you that whoever looks at a woman to lust for her has already committed adultery with her in his heart. I think there's a misconception sometimes that the homosexual orientation itself is sort of neutral, that or is inert, that everything is hinged upon activity. And I don't think that's a good way to approach it. This is from, I don't quote stuff that I agree with from the Catholic Church that often, but this is actually really good. It's from 1986. And this is when Cardinal Ratzinger was there. This is a letter to the bishops of the Catholic Church on the pastoral care of homosexual persons. And this is referring to an earlier document that Cardinal Ratzinger felt had been misinterpreted. And this is what he said. In the discussion which followed the publication of the Declaration, however, an overly benign interpretation was given to the homosexual condition itself, some going as far as to call it neutral or even good. Although the particular inclination of the homosexual person is not a sin, it is more or less a strong tendency ordered toward an intrinsic moral evil, and thus the inclination itself must be seen as an objective disorder. This is from the OCA from 1992, so just 4 or 5, just a few years later, 6 years later. This is called Synodal Affirmations on Marriage, Family, Sexuality, and the Sanctity of Life, again from the Orthodox Church of America. This is the quote, people with homosexual tendencies are to be helped to admit that these feelings let's start over. People with homosexual tendencies are to be helped to admit these feelings to themselves and to others who will not reject or harm them. They are to seek assistance in discovering the specific causes of their homosexual orientation and to work toward overcoming its harmful effects in their lives. Wow. I agree with that statement. So I think by stating that homosexuals are to seek assistance in discovering the specific cause of their homosexual orientation and to work towards overcoming them, I think is implicitly saying that the homosexual inclination itself is a problem. And I think what Jonathan tries to do, and I think everybody else, I think Barron tries to do that too, is bifurcate. And I think you get into trouble.
It just says to stone men that are caught with other men. And I'm not saying that in Christianity, let's say lesbian relationships are acceptable, but the Bible doesn't condemn identities, it condemns behavior. And so
the Bible doesn't condemn identity, it condemns behavior. I think that's simplistic. I think, and people could disagree with me, I might be totally wrong, but I think that Christ's words, you shall not commit adultery, but I say to you that whoever looks at a woman to lust for her has already committed adultery with her in his mind. So that means just the The inclination itself is a problem.
If you think that someone's behavior is identical to their identity, I don't like that. To me is already one of the problems of the modern age, is that traditional categories of identity are not behavior. Traditional categories of identity are things that give you your place in the world, will tell you kind of what place you have in the world. So you could criticize some of those identities, but they're not the same as behavior.
I think he's mixing stuff up there again because they are indelibly linked, because homosexuality also is attached to certain behaviors, but it's also attached to a certain mind space and an identity.
And
Sure,
so like
this
we could
is
even take a
language.
negative one. We could even say that the
No,
identity of a slave is something that which is not great, but a slave is not a behavior. A slave is a place you have in the world.
No, but you can deny someone's. You can phrase it in the forms of behavior, but at the end of the day, you're denying someone's experience. You're denying, actually, funny enough, the thing that they've evolved to have. So in the case of, don't do this and don't do that in forms of homosexuality.
Right. Well, we've also been evolved to kill people.
Yes.
So we deny that experience to people. Like, we deny that. But
Yes.
we're not denying their identity. Like, we're not saying that you're a murderer.
If you read Numbers, they seem perfectly fine with putting to death every man, woman, and male child to death because it's part of the outside. So it's like, well, really, we've evolved to kill within our own tribes, not the other, which is why we have these cognitive dissonance and this cognitive bias when it comes to certain charities and certain things that we see that are really bad, which rationally should make us act, but it doesn't, because that's actually not the way that we've evolved. It's wrong to say that we've evolved not to murder. It's like, no, murder has been this category which is only to your own people, not to other people. It's blurred. I will say it's blurred because it's difficult to figure out where that line has put itself, but it seems really clear that that's where the evolution has put us. And again, like the Bible, it would support this, because the Bible is telling you, it doesn't just tell you stories of what they did to people which are outside of their tribes. It gives you edicts on what to do. It tells you, where to get your slaves from, because you can't slave your own people, and if you do slave your own people, then you've got to set them free after XYZ. Oh, only if they're male, not if they're female. You get to keep them forever. But if they're a male, you have to set them free. But if you get your male slaves from the lands around you, then that's perfectly fine. Well, you can understand why that would evolutionary evolve. I would produce the hypothesis that that's probably not a good thing for us to be working with.
Yeah, and so one of the things that Christianity offers is a way to work out this problem. And you're right that it's a problem. You can see it, like in Scripture, it's a problem. And you can see it, like you said, by how severe the penalties are for any behavior which goes away from, let's say, the identity of the tribe or the cohesion of the tribe. It's like when in Scripture, in the Old Testament, like, the number of things that you have to kill someone for are just insane. Like, it's just so many things. The consequence is that they have to die. I mean, and you can understand it in a way, in the sense of a really tight knit tribe in a place that has very little recourse, and can't create systems of let's say, of prisons or whatever. Like, they just can't. They have this extreme version. And so what Christianity tries to do is to try to say, okay, so we have this inside and outside. We're not going to get rid of it. It's going to be there forever. And we have this hierarchy, which is not going to go away. So how do we elucidate? How do we participate in the best version of that? And so the answer that Christ gives is love your enemy. And so love your enemy is interesting, because he's not saying he's not your enemy anymore. right? And so if your enemy attacks you, it's complete, it's like if it attacks a country, Christians have always accepted that you can defend yourself, you can fight off the enemy, but you still have to have the capacity in you to see your enemy as human and your enemy, and the same with the idea of sinning. So certain behaviors continue to be prescribed, especially in terms of sexuality. So adultery, any kind of, and traditional Christianity, it's pretty radical. If, by the way, it's more radical than people want to admit, which is that any sexual act which is not within the promise of a marriage and that are involved in somehow in a pattern of family making is prescribed. So masturbation is prescribed, even within a.
I think what he's doing here is what Barron did with Reuben again. It's equating sodomy with heterosexual proclivities, which are not accepted.
Couple, like if you don't have full relationships, then it's prescribed. But it also, everybody knows that still happens. Like these things still happen. People still masturbate. People still have sex with men. Still have sex with men. All of this is prescribed. And we also have this idea that you have to have compassion for others, not judge others, and you have to tend your hand out to those that have fallen, and continue to have compassion for them. And so we can argue over the specifics of the homosexual question, but it's going to come back at, it's like the pattern itself is going to come back. So we can take that one and say that one shouldn't be part of it.
Okay, I can't take it anymore. His patterns. He talked a lot about compassion. This is from Dostoevsky. To love someone means to see them as God intended them. The issue of compassion, I think it has to do with accompaniment as well. Somebody that Jonathan Pageau knows well once said this. He said, an excess of compassion is destructive. Jordan Peterson said that, and he's done several. I did a Google search. He's done several talks where he mentioned the problem of compassion. So I don't. It feels like that's all he has, and it sounds a lot like Barron. So let's skip ahead a little bit, and then we're going to finish this critique.
Prescribe, but we also don't want to dehumanize the person that is doing it, and we want to continue to consider them human. The homosexual question, but it's going to come back at, it's like the pattern itself is going to come back. So we can take that one and say that one.
Okay, here, let's start right here.
One shouldn't be part of it, but okay, we could argue about that all day long, but there are other behaviors which are abhorrent and that we prescribe, but we also don't want to dehumanize the person that is doing it.
Okay, this sounds a lot like Bishop Barron. In terms of where he said to Dave Rubin, if the Catholic Church made people feel disordered, that was our fault. Well, disordered. Pageau's going in the same direction, that we don't want to allow LGBT people to feel dehumanized. Where in America or the West has that happened? Not recently.
And we want to continue to consider them human and to, let's say, have a way back, like have a bridge so the person can come back.
Okay, so with
what is that bridge?
Romans, homosexuality was just fine. With Spartan.
Okay, no. He's oversimplifying. In Rome, you had certain admonitions against homosexual behavior. A Roman citizen could partake in sodomy if they were the dominant partner and if the submissive partner was a slave or a prostitute.
It was just fine. In fact, Spartans used it as social as making it so that they adhere to each other, that they work harder, that they fight harder because the person beside them is someone that they deeply love. The Greeks were okay with homosexuality.
Wait, okay. Again, in Greek society, specifically Athenian, you had these pederast relationships between an older dominant male and a younger submissive adolescent. And they did not carry into adulthood, these relationships. Both men in that abusive, what I would say an abusive relationship, would go on to have a same-sex relationship and have a family. So it's interesting that they're making this historical argument in terms of these abusive homosexual relationships as being okay.
This is what I don't appreciate the Christian centric narrative here, because it's just not true that the natural order of thing is that. I actually think that it's probably a bug. Now, it may not be. It may have been something that was selected for, and it was a good thing during a certain time or given certain conditions. But here's a question for you, okay? Given that we have these mutually exclusive religions, these mutually exclusive motifs, these mutually exclusive patterns of being, unless you want to define them all in something so basic as order and chaos and be vague about it, which is one of the frustrations I have. But if you have all of these religions with these different views and these ideologies with different views, and we recognize that they're not arbitrary, but rather they are a product of, they are a manifestation of our evolutionary psychology, how the hell do we navigate which of them are features and which of them are applicable today? Because the only way I feel like real progress can be made is if you're willing and able to recognize that Christianity isn't the best thing since sliced bread. It's a great thing, and it has, and let me make that clear, I really do think it's a great thing. It has better patterns of being, say, than communism. But
how do we problem navigate? With what you're saying is, again, the same problem that I mentioned again, is that you tend to think that you can stand outside of this. And then you can say, how do we, who are we and where are we standing, that we can decide which patterns, which religion is better and everything. That's not our experience of reality. Our experience of reality is that we are the product of a story, and we are the product of a world, and we live in a world, and we live in embodied existence. And so the solution to making Christianity better is to be a Christian and to make it better.
The solution to making Christianity better is to be a Christian and to make it better. This is essentially the argument, I think, that Barron and Peterson have in terms of homosexuality, that in Pageau's sort of Gnostic approach is that I think if Christians are more compassionate and are more willing to accompany people that who have the LGBT or homosexual orientation, that Christianity will be better. I pretty much reject that. I wanted to end with just a couple of items here. This is from St. John Chrysostom. It says homily number 4 on Romans. I mean, right from the beginning, he writes, "For this cause God gave them up unto vile affections, for even their women did change the natural use." I mean, this was the passage he was commenting on. "For this cause God gave them up unto vile affections, for even their women did change the natural use into which is against nature, and likewise also the men leaving the natural use of the women burned in their lust one towards another." And John Chrysostom, right from the beginning, writes, "All these affections, not actions, all these affections then were vile, but chiefly the mad lust after males. For the soul is more the sufferer in sins, and more dishonored than the body in diseases." So it's more complex than just actions. And I wanted to end with this quote. This is from a woman named Allison Harris. Some people might not know who that is. Some really devout Father Seraphim fans might know who she is from the Damascene book. Allison Harris was a woman that Father Seraphim Rose, I believe, first met in college. He was at, where was he? He was at Claremont. Down, he was at a university down in Southern California. Sorry, in Claremont. It doesn't matter. And she was, I think, raised Anglican, but I think he ran around with an interesting circle of people. I guess now we would kind of consider them libertarians. They were raised, middle class, upper middle class in Southern California. And this was not the hippie generation, it was the preceding one. And so sort of the ones that became beatniks, but they were very open to different realities and, discussions of philosophy and music and art and an interesting group of people. And he had this enduring friendship with this woman, but their friendship endured, um, I would say, throughout his life. And she said this about Father Severus: Eugene renounced not only his past, but everything, even himself. He gave everything over to God. So I think in terms of approaching the homosexual question, I think focusing on homosexual activity is a place to start, because I think certainly somebody that identifies as gay or is involved in um, a gay relationship, they need to stop the activity, but the identity is another layer that needs to be worked on. I think that OCA um, statement was important. I think that one from the Catholic Church in 1986 was important. Um, and I think they hit at something, that the identity is also a problem. And I think what you see in Barron is really a folding over to the acceptance of maybe not homosexual activity, but certainly the homosexual orientation in the identity. And I think that's ratcheted up with Peterson, who now accepts homosexual relationships to the point of people of the same sex parenting a child. And then I think in Pageau, although I'll admit he's the better of the three at expressing a Christian viewpoint, I think he fumbles a lot, and I think he's trepidatious about speaking the truth in a more plain manner, which I think is what's needed. So, I mean, what has this accompaniment, the sort of accompaniment that I think Pageau and Peterson and Barron are employing, what has it actually wrought? Well, these two continue to speak. Um, Here is Peterson, his wife, Barron, and Barron's male priest secretary. Peterson's wife has converted to Catholicism. Here's the four of them in a podcast. This is kind of the end point. All of this accompaniment, what has it done? 2017, from 2017 to today. So 2017 was when Barron spoke with Rubin and really uh, relegated his responsibility to speak the truth, which he refused to do. And then you had, I think you have the same sort of equivocation with Pageau, much later though, and with a different interviewer. But I think it's the same spirit. And then sort of the capitulation of Peterson. And then this is the end result of accompaniment, of really not being brave enough to speak the truth. Because I think when essentially when these people um, who are social, what do you call it? Social media celebrities. I mean, they have a certain brand that they need to protect. And I think you can carve out a pretty successful career being anti-trans. I think Abigail Schreier has proven that. I shouldn't say anti-trans, but being um, very critical of the transgender movement. And I think there's a lot there to be critical of. I think doing that, being critical of homosexuality and same-sex marriage is a cancelable offense. And I think if any of these men did take a strong position on that, they would be canceled. And I think so they have their brand to protect. And that's too bad. Because I don't want to diminish the horrific problem of the transgender movement, but I think the numbers are clear. Many more people come out as homosexual than transgender. It's not even close in terms of numbers. So it's a problem. I knew that, and I knew that following Obergefell in 2015, that people tend to follow secular laws. That once laws go into action, they accept it as morally correct as well, and that's too bad. So thank you for joining me, and God bless you all.